Hi guys, Dave with First Place Auto Parts. Thanks for joining me out in the shop today. You know, I'm just buttoning up my 56 Chevy with a traditional combustion engine. But in today's video, we're gonna go in our way back time machine, go off the beaten path and take a look at a car that almost never was. As a matter of fact, it was a car that's one of the US auto manufacturers made 50 of, but it never went into production. And I'm talking about none other than the 1963 Chrysler Turbine car. Man, this car was really different. And you alternative fuel guys that think electric is the first alternative fuel to be used in a production car, you're wrong. Can you imagine using jet fuel, pulling up to the gas pumps and saying, Tony, give me 10 gallons of the good stuff, meaning jet fuel? It was crazy. The car idled at 22,000 RPMs and had a, wait for it, exhaust temperature of 1,400 degrees, which is crazy and yet was completely drivable. I'm gonna go ahead and finish buttoning this up. We'll go back in the studio, so hang out with me for a little bit and find out about the 1963 Chrysler Turbine car. Hey guys, if you liked today's video, please consider subscribing to the First Place Auto Parts YouTube channel. We're gonna continually be adding new videos every week where we show you how to put new parts on. We take a look at the latest parts that are available, and we go to some pretty cool car guy stuff I'm pretty sure you're gonna wanna see. To get started, we have to understand a little bit of history. Back in 1945, which was right at the end of World War II, which was fought by our greatest generation ever, Chrysler was awarded a contract by the Bureau of Aeronautics of the US Navy to start developing turboprop engines. As luck would have it, by 1949, the contract was canceled, so Chrysler switched gears and started developing a gasoline-powered turbine engine. Now, fast forward to the early 1950s, and Chrysler had some experimental gas turbine engines, not only on the dyno, but in some experimental vehicles as well. And in March of 1954, Chrysler made history by rolling out the first vehicle powered by a gasoline turbine engine. So now fast forward to 1963, and Chrysler rolls out the turbine car that we're going to take a look at today. The color, it was called Turbine Bronze. It was a 4-passenger, 2-door car designed by ex-Ford employee Elrod Engel, and that car was hand-built by Ghia in Italy. And these cars were also built not only to showcase Chrysler's ability to create something unique and different, powered by some sort of an alternative powertrain, but they were fully loaded luxury vehicles as well. Back in the early 60s, things like power windows, power steering, power brakes, and auto transmissions were considered luxury items, and the turbine cars, they had all of that. So the program was designed to build 50 cars, which they did. The 50th car was released on October of 1964. Essentially, they were able to make 1 car a week. And what they wanted to do with this program was to identify and test these cars, not only to consumer demand, but also to see how these cars fared up in day-to-day use. We call that market research today. We have a lot of computer models that we can do things with to find out that data. Back in the early 60s, they actually had to build these things, give them to people like you and me, and have them test drive them for a little bit and give their feedback. Now, if you squint real hard, you might see some of the second generation Ford Thunderbird in the actual body design. And look, that's not a surprise. The guy that designed this thing was an ex-Ford employee, but the interior was very futuristic. Look, this was a time when space and space travel was all the rage, and the car and the interior did not disappoint. Details like the circular, copper-colored steering wheel and an individual 4-bucket seats were things that Buck Rogers would have found in his spacecraft, and the exterior continued the space-age styling cue all the way to the flat and wide rear deck. When Chrysler handed over the keys to these cars to everyday Joes that were going to test drive these things, there should have been an announcement that said something along the lines of, "Captain, your spaceship is ready." Chrysler's consumer testing part of the program started in October of 1963 and ran all the way through October of 1965. During that time, 203 participants were part of the program's testing procedure, which included a 3-month stint with the car. All the participants were chosen by a third-party accounting firm, and the program was essentially designed to find out how people liked the car, what the press thought about it when seeing it on the streets, and how reliable were they. Now, why doesn't Chrysler do something like this today? I would absolutely sign up to drive one of the new TRX trucks or the Hellcat for 3 months. Come on, Chrysler, pick me. Ultimately, Chrysler chose not to go into production as we know with the turbine car. Look, the reality is a turbine, while very efficient and very smooth in an airplane that runs at a constant speed and constant RPM when flying, is terribly inefficient when it comes time to stop and go traffic. The reality was these cars only averaged roughly 17 miles to the gallon, which was really comparable to the big V8s of the mid-60s at the time, so they really presented no benefit in fuel economy and actually were kind of detrimental to the actual drivability. And speaking of drivability, well, it just was not what people were used to or really were going to put up with. When you started this thing, it took only a few seconds for the tachometer to swing to its 22,000 RPM idle speed, and the tach even showed the ear-splitting 60,000 RPMs that the thing would run at full whale. It only made 130 horsepower and would run the quarter mile in an incredibly slow 13.2 seconds. But the ultimate drivability killer was quite honestly the connection between the power plant and the transmission. There was no direct connection between the actual compressor that makes up the turbine and the turbine wheel itself. The turbine wheel is connected to the torque converter of an automatic transmission, and the only way that thing would begin to turn was when that compressor made enough hot air to blow across the turbine, which then began to spin the torque converter. Think of the loosest stall converter you've ever driven on the street. Multiply it by 4 and you'll get the idea of how much noise and RPMs it took just to get this thing going. You can imagine in stop and go traffic that we have today, the turbine would be totally undrivable. Not to mention the heat that it generates, which again at idle is 1400. The maximum stated was 1600. Once you got to 1600 temperature degrees at the outlet of the exhaust, you were supposed to shut this thing down for a couple minutes and let it cool down. So quite honestly, it was just an impractical drivetrain. Great for planes, bad for cars. Now you might think with that kind of a failure that Chrysler would abandon the turbine car program, but they did not. The reality is that program ran all the way through the early 80s. Look, there was a 1978 LeBaron and a 1981 Dodge Mirada that each had turbine engines shoehorned between the front fenders. Chrysler and Dodge have continually pushed the envelope, not only in styling, but also performance. These are the companies that gave us the Hemi, they gave us the Superbird, and they've given us a late model vehicle that produces over 900 horsepower, runs sub 10-second quarter miles, and you can drive it to work every day. As somebody who has gas in their veins, all I can say is keep it up, Chrysler. Your car buying public really appreciates the performance cars. Guys, I really appreciate you watching this video, and I hope you found it informative and maybe even a little bit entertaining. Keep an eye out for future videos where we look at cars that never were or ones that never quite made it. And until next time, keep the hammer down and keep it between the guardrails.